before. We'll click it, see what happens.
It's working.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming to today's Growth Lunch and Learn. My name is Chantel Caro. I'm on the Growth Executive Board Committee, but I'm also Gerontology faculty here at UNCG. We are working on Rebecca's sound issues, so she'll likely say something after our presentation today. I see everyone is already on mute. Thank you so much. I'm going to just pop up so I can remember our presentation title today. All right, so we have with us today Dr. Meredith Powers and Dr. Elise Eifert presenting on enhancing ecotherapeutic places and promoting nature-based activities across the lifespan. I did not practice another intro, so I'm gonna leave it really short and sweet and let Meredith and Elise take it away.
Thank you, Chantel.
All right, let me share the screen and we'll be in business. Everybody can see that? Everybody good?
Good to go.
All right. All right, thank you. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'll get us started and then Elise and I will kind of bounce back and forth and share some slides, mostly with pictures, and then have a little time to chat with you about your ideas and feedback. So we wanted to talk to you about enhancing ecotherapeutic places and promoting nature-based activities across the lifespan. And we did this as part of an overarching project with other colleagues and collaborators in the community, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Let's see if we can get to advance. There we go. But first, we wanted to pause and recognize our land acknowledgement. UNC Greensboro is a community of learners situated within a network of historical and contemporary relationships with Native American tribes, communities, parents, students, and alumni. We acknowledge that the land we gather on has long served as the site of meeting and exchange amongst a number of Indigenous peoples, specifically the Kiawe and Saura. We would also like to acknowledge Indigenous and First Nation peoples worldwide whose land, winds, and waters we now all share. We would like to pay respect to their beliefs and values and their continuing and enduring cultures which deepen and enrich the life of our global community. Before we get into the actual content of ecotherapy and kind of describe that a little bit, one thing I wanted to pause and think about is what is our worldview and how we understand relation to eco or environment. There's something that I'm becoming more familiar with that I did not grow up as an Indigenous person with a worldview that had me in relation to part of nature. Mine was more an anthropocentric, humans were in the center of everything and nature served human well-being, versus what many Indigenous populations and First Nations people and traditional people groups have a very different worldview. And so what I've been learning and researching and studying is something that from moving from an anthropocentric worldview to something called an ecosocial worldview, which recognizes the interconnectedness of all life in our ecosystem, and thus the fair and sustainable use of resources to promote these relationships and the well-being of all. This lens requires us to critically examine and question modern societal structures, values, beliefs, practices, and ways of life that lead to social and ecological injustices. Through overconsumerism, materialism, anthropocentrism, oppression, and exploitation of people and planet. And there's a few open access resources that I've written with some colleagues recently that kind of open up that a little bit more and discuss what an ecosocial worldview is. So from that standpoint, we're looking at what ecotherapy is. And just as a little bit of background, I love this quote, an old Zen saying. It says, "You should sit in nature for 20 minutes a day, unless you're busy, and then you should sit for an hour." And this is just a picture in my backyard that I took a few years ago. And I often think, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. I have the longest to-do list. And I go and sit in my backyard and just kind of decompress a little bit. And it really helps me get back into the right frame of mind. And when I come back to work, it's like, oh, why was I stressing about all of these things? I can handle it now. So for us, we're trying to say that ecotherapeutic practices or nature-based therapy is not something that's only done by a therapeutic or counselor person. It's something that you can also embrace and practice yourself on your own, or people that you work with in your community and client population. So it sometimes might look like just being in nature. A lot of times we're in the doing mode, but sometimes you just sit and you just are, you're just concentrating on being. Sometimes it might be observing nature items. Like I brought back some seashells and rocks and things from different places at the beach or places where I travel, and it sits on my desk and reminds me, and I can sometimes hold it even. That actually is really good too if you're dealing with people who have mobility issues and can't go outdoors or can't, be in nature for other reasons. You can bring nature items into them, such as artwork or plants or animals, which we'll speak about in a moment. It could also include music and how music is something that we use, the woodwinds and the strings and all these things. They're really originally part of nature, and we're making instruments trying to echo that. Journaling, photography, for me, you'll see a lot of the photographs in this presentation actually are ones that I've taken just for fun, but it really helps me connect, and I enjoy ecotherapy through photography. And then also there's something that Dr. Sandra Engstrom and myself have written this article, and we talk about radical self-care. And radical self-care, it also includes not just being, but doing something about the very things that are creating the grief and the stress. So that can also be ecotherapy if you're working on the thing that heals that problem, and it also heals you in turn. So that's another open access article if anyone wants to check that out. So ecotherapy also could be this practice of just being in nature. It boosts our growth and our healing, especially mental health. I love that even, we can take these little sayings. I share this with my class. Nothing in nature blooms all year round. Be patient with yourself. So again, understanding the life cycles within nature, it just helps you to see that we are part of nature, and we also don't need to think of ourselves as blooming or producing all year round, that there's really life cycles and times of year where we need to just have more reflection and calmness and planting and growing and thinking rather than blooming. So again, these activities could be, loosely structured and could be walking on the beach or other things that could actually be with therapeutic intervention, and an actual licensed counselor could be working with people doing ecotherapy. Some examples include wilderness therapy that I'll show you a picture of in a little bit. Other names that you may have heard this as maybe green care, green exercise, green therapy, nature therapy, horticulture therapy specific to plants. It's also nature-based therapy. And so there are just lots of different ways that we could do this. And I've written another chapter with a colleague who worked on the project with us as well, Dr. Justin Harmon. And we wrote this chapter for an open access book that you're welcome to check out. I'll put the link at the end. But we called this The Mighty Powers of Mud, Ecotherapeutic Practices for Personal and Professional Development. And Dr. Harmon actually works with people in Greensboro. It's called Celebrate the Trail to Recovery, and working with people who are recovering from cancer. And they go out and they do trail walks, and they use that as their ecotherapeutic intervention. For me, I looked at it more as a personal therapeutic intervention. This is me actually doing pottery. I like to get muddy. I love to get a little mud on my hands and create something. This is my daughter. We're planting our vegetable garden and the little the tomato plant that we got from the farmer's market, from an organic tomato plant that was already grown into a seedling. I like to go out into trails, just get muddy, ride bikes, whatever it is, but the powers of mud, and we sort of talk about that, and there's little exercises at the end of that chapter as well to describe what are some ways that you could personally look at doing ecotherapy, but then also convey those into the communities and client populations that you might be working with. Obviously, there's lots of benefits. I'm not a clinician myself, and I also don't study like the neurobiological levels. Some people even do the very detailed research of collecting saliva before and after people go into nature-based therapeutic interventions and show the actual stress hormones reducing. Obviously, a lot of this research has been done. It's part of what Dr. Harmon has done himself on his program and research, but it's also things that, we can tell just from our own experiences as well, that it can help manage our depression, create calming effects as we are really re-establishing our own tempo and getting in line with nature. It can lift our energy, help prevent burnout. This is definitely helping me this time of year of the semester, and this, in the midst of all these multiple crises that we keep dealing with. It improves our connections, our social connections with species other than humans, as well as with other humans if we go out in nature with other people. But again, seeing that interspecies collaboration, whether it's with your dog that you're walking or seeing butterflies or birds, whatever the case may be, but feeling that sense of connection and relationship. As if I'm, inside the house all day working, I'm like, oh, I should be exercising. But if I go outside, I actually start feeling the energy and I'm like, oh, well, maybe I do feel good enough to take a bike ride, like the folks in those pictures. So obviously, it's also something that I try to teach my students about is being mindful. And I actually have a exercise that I have my students do as an assignment to do 1 hour of ecotherapy every week, to be mindful about it, to take notes on what were the challenges or barriers that they faced and what were the things that they benefited. And then to reflect mindfully on how that is something that they could do with their future clients and communities that they'll be working with in their careers. Examples include community gardening or farming. There's an example here with Peace Haven Community Farm that is in Witsit, and that's a community that I've been working with and maybe some of you know about as well. There's wilderness or adventure therapy. There's an example there with people with the nonprofit program that was running a while ago. Some of my colleagues and friends have retired from that, running that, but it was called Challenge Adventures, and they used alpaca and took children out into the wilderness, literally, and the alpacas would carry it. And the alpacas really, honestly, served as a therapeutic interspecies collaborative, being that the children would sometimes confide in and talk to, rather than to a real counselor, human counselor. And it really enhanced their therapeutic benefit, not just being in nature, but being with other species as well. Park prescriptions. There's literally, doctors that are now writing this. There's something called nature deficit disorder that children are suffering from, and people are starting to realize that we have to get back out and connect with nature more. Forest bathing, or as we would call it, just taking a walk in the woods, but bathing amongst the trees is something that that forest bathing has been really taken up in Asia. Animal assisted therapy, and I put this little note here just to remind us that we're not using animals solely for human benefit, rather we're creating those mutual beneficial interspecies collaboration for healing and well-being. So just to be mindful that there is a very big difference of having an animal as a product that you use to benefit humans versus creating a mutually shared and beneficial relationship. And obviously outdoor meditation and yoga. That's my daughter sitting on a little rock in the stream near Greensboro. We just went for a little walk in the woods with my brother one day, and he said, wow, this is a beautiful place. We should come back here and do some meditation one time. And I said, well, why don't we do it right now? And then we all sat down and just kind of meditated. And he actually saw my daughter doing this and took a little picture of her. And I thought it's one of my favorite pictures. I actually have it as my screensaver on my computer, so that it reminds me I should be getting out into nature and not sitting at my computer very much. And then this is my dog for my own interspecies collaboration and love, that he went to the beach with us recently. And that's definitely something that helps me get that there. You want to take it from here? You want to do a few minutes?
Absolutely. So as you can tell, ecotherapy is something Meredith is really, really passionate about. And when I met Meredith and she kind of told me all about ecotherapy, and because I'd never heard of it, I'd never really thought of it. And as soon as I learned more about it, as soon as I listened to Meredith, I really thought to myself, gosh, this could have a lot of implications for aging. For most of you, if you don't know, I'm Elise Eifert. I'm the graduate coordinator for the Gerontology program. So my passion is really older adults and aging. And so Meredith and I have worked together really well to kind of intersect these two really interesting areas. And so one of these examples that I wanted to highlight that kind of came to my attention was a project that's happening in Washington right now. And it's being led by Leading Age. And Leading Age it's an organization in every single state for the most part, but they're advocating for older adults. And so Leading Age in the state of Washington applied for some grants and some money. And what they wanted to do was create engagement opportunities in long-term care communities. And so they thought about a lot of different things, and what they ended up landing on was a horticultural program. And so they partnered with a nonprofit organization called Elder Grow, which is a therapeutic horticultural company. And so what they do is they bring gardening indoors for the residents of these communities. And if those pictures are actual pictures from Elder Grow and from this initiative that they're doing in Washington, and you'll notice that there are these little flower beds or these gardening beds, and if you look at the bottom, you'll see that they have wheels on them. And so these are really built by Elder Grow, and then the relationship is really that the residents are tending to it on a daily basis, but it's the Elder Grow employees that come in once or twice a month to really check on everything, to support the residents, make sure that they have everything that they need. But on a day-to-day basis, it's the residents that are really planting, growing, maintaining, and kind of interacting with that, with the dirt, with the flowers, and really getting that ecotherapy from it. So it's a really beautiful example of bringing ecotherapy to older adults. I also wanted to just highlight career activities. So obviously, I'm in gerontology education. I've got the gerontology students that are constantly exploring career paths. And one of the texts that my students have to read is a book called 101 Careers in Gerontology. And it's been the premier careers in aging text for many, many years. But in this latest edition, they added a new career path that is really in line with this, and that's horticultural therapy. And so my students, I had a handful of students that became really, really interested in this. And in particular, this semester, I'm teaching this course. My students are reading this text. And one of them, it was a light bulb moment for her. She's very passionate about gardening, and she loved older adults, and she wanted this gerontology degree, but she just wasn't really sure what she was going to do with it. And then when she read this in this textbook and said, wait a minute, I can be a horticultural therapy. I can bring gardening to older adults in a therapeutic manner and help older adults heal and be healthy. She was really, really excited about it. And now that's really the career path that she's going to pursue upon graduation. So again, just another great example of how we were able to kind of bridge ecotherapy and aging together. So I did my research. Once Meredith planted the seed in my little head, I was like, okay, I want to know more about ecotherapy and aging. And there is a plethora of research and evidence that are really supporting the power of ecotherapy with older adults. So it's something that I want to be mindful of in always doing evidence-based practice. And so here's just a very snippet, like a very, very small portion of some of the things that I thought were really powerful and beneficial to ecotherapy. So one study saw improvements in memory, and that's, you know, cognitive health is a big thing for our older adults. So just thinking that being out in nature and having some opportunities to interact with our environment can help with our memory. That's something really simple and something really easy that people can do. Another study found a relationship with the immune system. So again, something really simple, really easy to do that could have a huge impact on older adults who are often immune compromised or vulnerable to certain infectious illnesses. And so to think that we can improve that or make older adults' immune system a little bit healthier and stronger. That's really great and very powerful. Another really cool thing is life expectancy. I mean, we all want to live as long and healthy as we can, right? And so in this particular study, it was about older adults who lived in environments that were surrounded by vegetation. So they were looking at homes that were surrounded by woods, but also homes that had a lot of garden and green spaces surrounding them. So that was a really interesting study. And then one that's really, really common is the alternatives to medications. Meredith Dr. Powers kind of mentioned this about the prescribing nature, and we're seeing this more and more. So those who work with older adults know that older adults are often overprescribed. A lot of older adults are dealing with 20, 30 prescriptions, and that has a lot of negative consequences. There's interactions with those medications, and it can be really dangerous. And so there's a lot of initiatives on what can we do to reduce the number of medications. And so this study was basically talking about group walks in a natural setting, and that can be an alternative to certain prescription medications. So really great to think about it that way, as well as a benefit to ecotherapy. In general, one of the other great benefits is when you're outdoors, it's a natural movement, right? You have to move from indoors to outdoors. And so even something as simple as that, whether it's a walk around your house, whether it's a drive to the park and a walk on a trails, is that we're getting older adults up and moving. We know that older adults are the most inactive population across the life course, and inactivity has a lot of health consequences. So if we can find ways to get older adults more active and then engage with nature as well, we're talking about benefits related to memory, benefits related to the immune system, benefits related to life expectancy. So lots of positive things are building, and kind of this narrative of ecotherapy and aging is becoming stronger and stronger. Now, with that said, ecotherapy with older adults can be an uphill climb, right? It's not always easy to get older adults up and moving. And so there's a couple of things that I kind of want to ask people. And the first one would be, are the outdoors always inclusive to older adults? So I have a video. Meredith, do you think we can play it? Is it possible? Okay, do you want to press pause so I'll try to, I don't know if the sound will go.
Yeah, I wonder if it is going to play the sound off of my computer as if I'm speaking, if I turn my mic on.
So it may not play, or you may not be able to hear it.
Here, let's test it.
Okay.
Could you hear that?
Can hear it. Okay, so no video.
Okay, we'll share the link to the slides.
Yep, that's great. It's a really interesting video, and it's from REI, if you can see in that kind of that corner. And REI is doing this, which REI, by the way, it's gosh, I don't even know how to describe it. And outdoors, Meredith, how would you describe REI? For those that maybe don't know, I mean, I know it's a store corporation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to get, people out with like outdoor equipment, geared up for
equipment. Yes, gear.
Equipment, yes, recreational
Thank you.
equipment. Recreational.
Couldn't come up with that word.
It's mostly for like, not, it could be for like just walking or running, but it's more for like actual like outdoor adventuring, as camping, hiking, backpacking, biking, all those different components.
Thank you. So they're doing a huge campaign. They've been doing it this past year about making, their question is, are you outdoorsy? And they're doing it for a lot of different populations that have been traditionally excluded from outdoor adventuring. So there's commercials related to women, there's commercials related to people of color, there's some videos on, oh gosh, there's another group that I can't think of. And then the big group is also older adults. And so these videos are all about how can we make the outdoors attractive to all these different populations, and kind of realizing that the outdoors are for everyone. They're not for specific people. So back to that original question, are the outdoors inclusive of older adults? And I would say that, historically they haven't. A lot of, when we talk about outdoors, we don't really traditionally think about older adults and whether older adults would be interested in that. So we really have to consider, how can we help older adults get outdoors? And the messaging that we talk about when it comes to outdoor activities is, can we include older adults in that story and in that narrative? The second question is, are the outdoors age friendly? We do have to be conscious that for some older adults that there are certain risk factors where we have falls, uneven ground, improper lighting, things like that, that can make certain outdoor areas unsafe for older adults, and certain natural spaces really inaccessible to older adults. So we want to be thinking, and I encourage you, the next time you are outdoors and you're looking around, I challenge you to say, gosh, could an older person really navigate this? Is this welcoming to an older person? Are there certain risks that an older adult may, be aware of that I don't even think about, but that's probably a concern for them? So we want to be thinking about, how can we make natural spaces a priority for our aging population and more aging friendly?
Yeah, and that's when, after the research that Elise had done, and then also just in our conversations, we started thinking, well, wouldn't it be fun to find a place in Greensboro that we could actually enhance and make it a little bit more inviting for people to get outdoors and to engage with nature in those ways. So we just kind of started surveying around Greensboro, connected with Parks and Recreation, a partnership that Justin Harmon already had, and started going and surveying some of the different parks that they said, yeah, we'd love to partner with you on this, or this. And, they kind of pointed us in a few directions, and we surveyed a little bit. And then kind of landed on a partnership with the Smith Active Adult Center. And we also, through the Growth Network, and Rebecca told us about some funding that was an opportunity that was in the community, and how we could partner with the Junior League Greensboro to get that funding, as well as the volunteership, the many hours that they poured into this project, and made this possible in partnership with Greensboro Parks and Recreation, and all the amazing folks that we got to partner with and collaborate with. So along with Dr. Benjamin Hickerson, who had done a lot of park renovation projects up in Pennsylvania, and he lent his expertise as well. So it was a really fun collaborative project that took place over a couple of years, and did some pretty neat things, I would like to say, outdoors. We'll show you a little bit of the before and a little bit of after. This is also based on the community engaged research. We really want to be community engaged, and not just like, oh, let's just fix something for the community, but really, what does the community want? And part of the research that Elise had already done was looking at, what are older adults in our community wanting and thinking about as a strength, and how can we enhance that? You want to read this as one of your quotes from your research?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the privilege of working with Jenny and the Smith Active Adult Day Center to do a little bit of a needs set assessment. So I got to interact with many of their participants and the people that are actively engaging at the Smith Center. And so I did a couple of focus groups, and this quote in particular from a male Greensboro resident really stood out to me as a strength of Greensboro, where he said the variety of venues from gardens to trails where individuals can kind of engage in their own recreational pursuits, you know, that does set Greensboro apart from other communities in the state. So this is important because what it's recognizing is that Greensboro is special, right? Like people can retire, they can live, they can age anywhere. And there are a lot of great places to do that. But in our state, we're recognizing right off the bat that Greensboro may be attractive to older adults because of these natural spaces, these gardens, these recreation centers, the trails, the parks, everything that Greensboro is really, really known for. This is valuable because it gives us a place to start, right? Like if we're acknowledging that these opportunities exist, our next step is then how can we get older adults to really utilize or maximize these opportunities.
Yeah. So other ways that we did community engagement to kind of collect research, but also to participate in the ongoing research that the city was already doing. For instance, Planet Greensboro was, they were having a conversation. Actually, I think it was hosted at Smith Adult Center, Active Adult Center.
The one we went to, yeah.
That's actually like, that's their, you know, picture that they took there of Elise, and we were all participating, putting dots on the boards of like, where do we really think as community members we want to, you know, see the city put their efforts and funding and things like that. So I even brought, you know, some of the students from my class, from the environmental justice class that evening. It was pretty cool. And then also getting involved with senior games and seeing, you know, what are the things that they want to be doing outside as active adults. And then the Adopt a Park program is another way that, again, part of a radical self-care is like, hey, if we take care of our environment, we're also doing something about the very things that hurt us and cause us grief. So these are, again, ways that we were trying to have an overarching community engaged approach to this research and applied scholarship project. So when we did kind of, this is the old picture, I guess, from a few years ago when it was Smith Senior Center. It's now Smith Active Adult Center, which I love that name change. And we had some information from some of the Park and Rec's office collaborators who helped us with planning, and they had already designated that they were planning to rehab the old tennis courts that were a little bit dilapidated at that point and weathered, and they were going to turn it into a pickleball complex. And they said, if we could get you to, you know, help with some seating area that would be, you know, really beautiful and inviting in between the playground and the new pickleball complex, that would be a really cool thing. So that's what we kind of surveyed this little space, looked around and said, okay, well, here's actually, you can see the orange lines where they started to designate exactly where the sidewalks would be built, and a gazebo was funded through the Junior League, as well as a lot of the volunteership for doing some landscaping at this little area. And we like this. I love this quote, you know, the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it did take us maybe a little bit more time than a normal, just like, hey, let's just make a park enhancement. But it was really fun to get to know the people in the community, you know, to get to work with everyone and to build those relationships, as well as to see what the community actually wanted. So we ended up, you know, having gazebo, a seating area, the plaque that, you know, noted that the Junior League had donated some funding and worked with Parks and Recreation. We also tried to think about permaculture for landscaping, so that it really was something that didn't become a burden to the Smith Active Adult Center folks or to Parks and Recreation, but that it would be something that could be somewhat self-sustaining and not just like beautiful flowers that required an enormous amount of watering. So we're really thrilled to have those partners and funding opportunities, and to come alongside the city of Greensboro and to bring expertise and students and all kinds of folks from the university relationship as well.
And just so everybody really recognizes Junior League too, that it was not just funding. We applied for a competitive grant, and we were able to receive that. But part of receiving that grant is that Junior League is a service organization. And so a big component of that is that you have to provide service hours and opportunities for the members of the Junior League. And so those ladies really put in a lot of labor and creativity and just general service to really execute this project. So I definitely want to acknowledge the Junior League, not only for the grant and the funding, but really their hard work.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Yeah, and so this was from a Monday night class that I had with my environmental justice class, and we did during COVID, we're doing hybrid outdoor meetups. And so we actually went and met at the park one Monday night, and it was beautiful. And folks were out there playing on the pickleball courts. Again, this space that was created with the idea that it would be inclusive and intergenerational, and it was just a beautiful sitting space. There's actually some of my students in the gazebo, and you can see the benches that were put there, again, with some plaques, and the permaculture ideas of the landscaping that was just still maintained and beautiful. I think that looks great. So yeah, so that's sort of one of the projects that we did to enhance, and we're kind of thinking, okay, well, where do we go from here? Are there other places we can partner, other ways to help increase outdoor activities for older adults and make them more accessible, ways that we can make parks more attractive to a greater number of people. And then also maybe if there is another way to develop new partnerships or continue partnerships for funding, maybe even the Hartford Foundation. I was a Hartford Foundation scholar back in my doctoral program and had funding to work with the students who were receiving our Hartford Foundation grants to work with older adults as social work interns. And so some of that, kind of sparked that conversation with Elise and I to begin with as well. And one of the things I forgot to note is that we were talking about the different, variety of people when you say older adults. I mean, that can be a large array of possibility, and people who may be very active to those who may be homebound or, in an organization that's caring for them. But even the opportunity that I said, bringing things inside, like nature photos, or having them do artwork, or, even I have my students bring a leaf to class, and then we put the leaf on a piece of paper and turn it into some sort of artwork. I can show you some pictures of that. But also just the idea that still having fresh air, not just an open window, but, maybe you think you might be doing a favor for an older adult to say, oh, I brought you your mail, so you didn't have to go out to the mailbox. That might be the only time during the day that they would have gone out to the mailbox, and you say, oh, well, I wanted to prevent you from falling. Well, instead, offer to walk along with someone to get their mail, and they can greet their neighbors and see a bird and, feel the breeze, and all those different opportunities to really engage people in nature and not, prevent them from having those natural experiences in their lives. So yeah, this is one that Elise found and kind of pitched to our team, and I really like this idea. So you want to speak to this?
So this happened very, very recently in Chatham County, which is, I think, Pittsboro, just kind of west of Chapel Hill area. And it really came out of the COVID situation, where the county was hearing that there were a lot of family caregivers that were feeling very isolated and very homebound because of their responsibilities as a caregiver, and everything was shut down other than nature, being outside. And so what they decided to do, and it was a partnership between the local council on aging, the Parks and Recreation there, as well as the Center of North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service. And they developed this peaceful pathways for caregivers. And the picture that you see on the screen is an actual picture of one of the pathways. But they wanted to make a dedicated place for caregivers to get outside, enjoy nature, relax, and a safe place to walk and exercise. And so it's not just for the caregivers, but they also were encouraging the care recipients to come along and accompany their caregiver as well. So these paths are actually very, very wide, but they're very, very flat as well. So they're not much of a a fall risk or a trip risk. But if you just look just for a second at the light shining through the trees, the shade that it offers, like it's a very beautiful and peaceful space. And so for caregivers who maybe don't get a lot of opportunity to get outside, this is a really nice, safe, comfortable space that is dedicated just for them and for their well-being.
And so we may do something like that, approaching our own community to see if that's a possibility that we can help work on an enhancement. There's also actual just, walking groups. That is something that I've been reading a little bit about. This Yes magazine had something about veterans and hiking trails as a solution for PTSD and, really helping. And so there's a little bit more research that I want to do on this, but it's something I've started a conversation with on campus with our military affiliated services, and thinking about possibility of creating, walking groups similar to what Dr. Harmon is doing with the Celebrate the Trail to Recovery. Another project that I'm doing to kind of enhance an outdoor nature space related to military is the SBC Garden, the Service and Bravery Commemorative Garden, that will honor military service members and veterans who are transgender or gender diverse. And so basically I had a funder come to me and say, hey, I want to create a memorial for transgender veterans. And I said, oh, what a great idea. And I don't know anything about creating memorials or monuments and things. And so I sort of put him on in contact with other folks a few years ago. And last year I was at one of the permaculture gardens downtown with my class. This photo is actually from that garden. And it dawned on me, it was just such a therapeutic space, such a beautiful healing moment, and just so, so beautiful. And I thought, I wonder if anything ever came of that monument. And I reached out to the donor and said, hey, are you still interested in working on it? And what if we turn it into a memorial garden, a space that could, allow for contemplation and reflection and healing, and people could come together and have celebrations. And he really loved the idea. And I started talking to lots of people in the community. I mean, Parks and Recreation, Greensboro, Guilford Green Foundation, IRC, like just everybody. I just tried to put out feelers, and everybody everywhere love the idea. Greensboro Beautiful, Greenway, Greensboro Greenway. I mean, just you name it. I've been kind of feeling around. And it was during COVID, so not really a lot of people were ready to just say, hey, let's pop this up. But it's also something I really have been building a steering committee of people who are themselves to be honored by this garden, as well as people who are allies like myself. So again, I've gotten a little bit of funding within HNAC at UNCG. I've been working with the Gender Diversity Working Group at UNCG, as well as military affiliated services. So it might actually find its home on UNCG campus at some point, but we're also still open to talking about situating it in the community at large. But that's something that, is a nature enhancement space that would also be eco-therapeutic that I've been working on for a little bit. There's other community organizations. Do you want to talk about these, or I can share some of these?
I'll definitely talk about Creative Aging Network, and if you want to talk about some of the other ones. So the Creative Aging Network is a wonderful organization here in Greensboro. But they offer a number of different classes that are really arts oriented. And sometimes those classes have natural or nature elements to it. So I always say, keep an eye out for that. But they are also doing a new initiative called the International Garden, which is providing opportunities for elders to grow plants from their native region and share cultural recipes through cooking classes. So has a little bit of that element of horticultural therapy. So I just wanted to point that out, that the Creative Aging Network is kind of doing this and may not even realizing that they're doing a little bit of ecotherapy.
Yeah, thanks. That also reminds me of the New Arrivals Institute has community gardens, and a lot of their older adult refugee immigrant populations are working with that, as well as the Montagnard Dega Association has a farm that I was able to go visit one time, and they shared, that they were growing things that it might be somewhat available at an international market, but she showed me a little clump of cassava leaf that was like this big, and she said this would barely be enough, when you cook it down for one portion, and it would cost over $5. And then they had all of these plants growing in the farm, and the older adults that were there giving me the tour, it was just so fascinating that they had that ability to work in the land and to really stay connected and to their roots of culturally appropriate food, and then having it not just accessible but affordable. Greensboro Beautiful has gardening projects, litter pickup, the campaigns and things that people get involved with. The Downtown Greenway, they've offered permaculture classes. In fact, I invited my parents to come with me to some of those last year. They do outdoor meetups and walking events. They did some of the permaculture gardening. They had Justin and his partner David working on the permaculture right in front of is it Joymongers, the brewery, and they had an outdoor event last fall, or excuse me, probably this spring. I'm getting all the dates confused during COVID. Greensboro Farmers Curb Market obviously is an opportunity for people to come together, to connect, to shop. They might be open to vendors. Certainly learning, they do a lot of nutritional and ingredients and different things. They even had a scavenger hunt one time that I took my daughter to, and we learned about a lot of things that we didn't even know existed in the world. They also have a senior farmers market nutrition program, so that it's sort of like SNAP benefits or WIC or different food security programs. Oh, that one got duplicated, sorry. But we have also the Native Plant Society. This is actually a red columbine from one of my friends who's part of that, and she's been working, and I think she's of 3 people maybe under 50 in the Native Plant Society. So everybody else, they're very eager for her to start taking on leadership roles because they're ready to kind of like maybe take less leadership, but it was fascinating. I went to an event there recently. The Permaculture Guild, the Greensboro Public Library has tons of events related to ecotherapy, and I can post some of those as well. The Sierra Club, and obviously the UNCG also hosts Sustainability and Dialogue series. So there's lots of things going on that relates to nature-based therapy, sustainability, ecotherapy, and is certainly, maybe if it's not only geared for, but it certainly is suitable for working with older adult populations and getting people engaged in lots of ways for healing. You want to speak to this one a bit?
I just want to highlight some of the great opportunities that exist through our city parks and recreation. Of course, there is the Smith and Trotter active aging centers that have outdoor walking areas and parks that are very accessible to the whole community, but I think also aging friendly. There's lots of gardens, so if you want to get your ecotherapy from flowers and smells and beauty along those lines, Arboretum, Bicentennial Gardens, Gateway Gardens, these are all excellent places for older adults to kind of commune and access. And then there are lots of walking and hiking trails, and I did want to separate these just because if we do have older adults that are maybe have some gait problems or a little unsteady on the feet, that the concrete trail, walking trails at Barber, Country Park, Hester, Keeley, and Price are probably a better option. Those are smooth concrete trails that are less of a trip risk, where the natural parks, I mean, I only named some of these. The city has, I think, close to 15 different natural hiking trails. Those are, have roots and acorns and things that could trip people up. So you have to be considerate about what would be most appropriate, but there are lots and lots and lots of hiking trails and outdoor opportunities, I think, that are available to people. Sorry, I forgot about this one too. We also have, Meredith kind of mentioned this, but the walking groups in the area. And I did want to pull out the ones that are specific to older adults. There's a really great group from Guilford Green Foundation, which is the Gay and Gray Walk and Talk. And they meet at different parks, once a month, and they gather and they walk and they chat, and it's a very therapeutic experience just from the talking, but also it's very therapeutic because they're typically outdoors. The Greensboro Park and Recreation also has a 50+ hiking club. So if we do have some really active older adults that enjoy some maybe more extensive hiking, that's a good option. And then Meetup, which is a public online space where you can, get connected to groups, and these groups are all a variety of hobbies and interests, basically. But I went on there and just very quickly looked for meetups that were geared towards outdoors and older adults. And so I found one group that was titled Outdoorsy Women Over 60 Enjoying Life, Living, and Laughter. I love that group. I love that title. Let's do it. And then there was another group that was #50after50 walk. So I think these are good walking groups geared towards older adults, great opportunities to meet people as well.
And I forgot to put another resource, but I'll add it before we send out slides. But this is one resource that a colleague of mine from Warren Wilson College, one of her friends and colleagues, Mallory McDuff, has written this. It's called Our Last Best Act, Planning for the End of Lives to Protect the People and Places We Love. And so she, wrote that from sort of a personal standpoint with her own parents going through death and dying, and looking at how, part of end of life cycle is also something that we might want to think about in older adulthood or at any point in life, but also how that impacts nature and the sustainability of things that we leave behind for next generations. And in fact, the other resource I forgot to add was All Souls Natural Burial Association, which is here in Greensboro, and it's the only one in Greensboro area. There might be another one, I think, in Burlington, towards Asheville, but that one's right here near Jefferson Gardens, off Jefferson near Guilford College. And I can post that. And I actually took my environmental justice class there, and we met with Father Randall Keeney and talked about the different opportunities that people in our community, it's not, connected to any faith. I mean, it is literally connected to St. Barnabas Episcopal Church, but it's open to any faith. It's not, just for people who may be Episcopal. But we walked around the trail. It is they are trying to keep it, in the condition that it could be wheelchair accessible, and it's something that they're doing to have green or natural burial opportunities. And again, it was something that I wanted my students at UNCG in the environmental justice class to consider for their own life planning, for their families, but also for how we look at how we live sustainably and what we consume and what we may need to leave behind to others at some point. So I just thought that was maybe something to share as well. This book literally just came out, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I got my copy. All right, well, thank you so much. And we have opportunity for questions or collaborations. And here's our information if you want to get in touch with us. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk and share with you today.
Let me jump in. Can you hear me? Good. Okay. First of all, I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. I now understand what happened. I'm logged in on another computer, which fortunately I had nearby. But I want to thank Dr. Powers and Dr. Eifert for presenting today. This was really interesting. I knew about the project, from the beginning, but I really had not seen the outcome or the before and after pictures or any of that, and that was just a really awesome presentation. I will work with Chantel to get this up on YouTube on the UNCG Growth YouTube channel, which I'd encourage you all to go and subscribe to. There are other presentations up there that might be of interest. I did have, first, what I was intending to do at the beginning of the meeting is welcome you to the first Growth Lunch and Learn for the fall. It took us a little while to get started this year because we were going through some transitions and still obviously working out the bugs based on what happened today. I would encourage you, if you were on the invitation list, to share that invitation with other people. There's a sign up button on the bottom where there's a form that people can fill out and be added to the distribution list. And of course, if you weren't on the distribution list yourself, please email growth@uncg.edu and I'll make sure that you're added to the list. I have a couple of personal comments and questions for the presenters, but I'd like to open it up to other people first. Is there anybody who would like to raise a question or make a comment?
I can read.
Just put a question in the, sorry, Chantel, I just put a question in the comments and I think Meredith is answering it. Thanks. I'd love to follow up with you later on some details. Thanks.
Anyone else right now? Well, I just wanted to mention a little, I wanted to go back to kind of build on Elise's comments about the Junior League. One of the reasons that this happened is because when I first started my career, the Junior League reached out to me not as growth coordinator, but as a former grant recipient. And I just wanted to give you a little history of what the Junior League was doing back when I first got here in the 80s and give them credit for something people may not know they deserve credit for, which is I was hired to do a needs assessment of Greensboro to find out what kind of services for older adults were most needed. And at the time, we did not have an adult daycare center in town, or at least not ACEs, which is what grew out of that Junior League funded project. And like Elise and Meredith mentioned, they provided volunteers. 70 Junior League members did interviews for me at a call center. And they've continued, this is kind of a bookend comment, because they've continued to do good things for the community and work within the Aging Network between these two times. So I was delighted when Tuisha Fernandez contacted me from the Junior League, and that's when I reached out to Meredith and Elise and Justin Harmon and eventually Ben. So thank you, Junior League, again. And the other thing I wanted to comment on, and this is really a question for Elise. Elise didn't really go into her own background here, but she's an expert on caregiving as in addition, to having worked in this area. So when you made those comments, Elise, about walks for caregivers, it conjured up images for me of your dissertation and your concerns that caregivers wouldn't take advantage of services because they didn't identify as caregivers but as children of adults. I wondered if you had any thoughts on how you could encourage caregivers to take advantage of nature and to use it as a source of energy and refreshment while they were in the midst of their duties.
I think that's a really good point. And if you may recall, the name of that program in Chatham County was Peaceful Pathways. So I think the fact that they started out framing this as a mental health or a way to deal with challenges and stress is was a good idea. I think that was a very strategic thing that they did. And that way it appeals to maybe not necessarily just caregivers, but anybody who is dealing with stress or dealing with some challenges in life, that they can utilize that pathway to as a way to connect to nature and release some stress and steam. So I think that's definitely one way to do it. But we do have to be really careful when we market stuff to family caregivers that, we have to recognize that not all caregivers are going to connect to that word. And so if there's other ways that we can use the term caregiver or alternatives to caregiver, providing care to a loved one. It may seem obvious that that's a caregiver, but a lot of people connect with that. Like, oh yeah, I'm providing care to my mother, but I'm not a caregiver. So yeah, it's a lot of reframing and messaging and the kind of narrative that we utilize, I think, in aging services that we have to be really conscious of.
Anybody else have a comment they'd like to share?
I have a question. So Elise, you talked about, the importance of making sure outdoor spaces are inviting and safe for older populations. I work with populations that often have mobility impairments, so might be in a wheelchair, using a walker or a cane. Do you have any tips for how to, not just encourage them to be outside and spend time in nature, but also help with safety and make people comfortable? Because I think care partners are often really uncomfortable taking their loved ones in kind of unfamiliar physical situations where, they might worry about a fall, or they might feel isolated, so that if there is a fall, they're gonna, be in big trouble where they can't easily get help. There's just a lot of extra feelings associated with outdoor spaces, I think, for this population.
Thank you, Jessica. You actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because this speaks to my third group that I was struggling with, that the REI was trying to focus on with their traditionally marginalized groups that haven't been encouraged to access outdoor opportunities. And it's people with disabilities or handicap challenges, things like that. So it's almost very similar to the aging experience, where we have to be conscious of our messages, and that when we have these outdoor opportunities, are we really being inclusive? Are we inviting everybody, no matter your level of ability, no matter your challenges? That these, especially, I think, city parks, communal areas, things like that, that they really should be promoted and geared towards everybody, not just certain able-bodied individuals. So that message of inclusivity, that's a hard one. That message of inclusion, I'll go with that. We really all need to work hard at that. The other thing that I would say is that design, when communal spaces, natural spaces, or parks, anything like that are being designed, that we really need to put more of an effort and demand that these spaces are friendly to different levels of abilities, because they really haven't been. Now, I know that's really hard when I say natural spaces, because we don't want to alter a natural space and how they are. But when we're being intentional and we're creating certain outdoor spaces, we really need to be thinking about how we can do a better job of building these spaces and creating these spaces so that they are friendly to multiple different people. And so that's really not, an individual approach. Like it really comes from a lot of leadership, and it comes from powers that be, bodies that make decisions. But as a community, we can really try to express our, a collective voice to that leadership, so that when decisions are being made, that they're hearing from, people in the community. So for example, Meredith talked about the planet that the city of Greensboro was kind of doing. That would have been a great opportunity at that time when the city was thinking strategically for the next 10 years, what are we going to do? That would have been an opportunity for us to say, hey, we need to make sure that these parks are inclusive of all these different people.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just interject here. I do think the AARP gave some of that kind of input into that planning process. And it did have some good effect. The plan changed a little bit after the AARP weighed in. I also wanted to comment on Elise's response to Jessica, which as a sociologist, I really like your response, Elise, of going to the structural level, because although I really appreciate your sensitivity, Jessica, to individual older adults, until we get structural solutions, is somebody like you who works directly with older adults will have to give, solve one person's problem at a time, and that's not the most efficient way to do things. So I really appreciate, Elise's comment that we need to work at a structural level. I also wanted to make an aside comment, and then I'll ask if anyone else has comments. A memory occurred to me during this presentation a little bit before the pandemic. Maybe it was a whole year before the pandemic. I was asked to give a presentation at a local CCRC, and it was at a dinner. And a lot of the residents were at the dinner. The presentation was for the residents, not the staff. And a lot of the residents were at the dinner and wanted to have a conversation about issues at the CCRC instead of having me present, which I eventually did. But the issue they raised was that another CCRC in town had a walking trail. And why didn't they have a walking trail? They were paying plenty of money and they wanted a walking trail too. So it does dawn on me that as you're working on developing sustainable places in Greensboro and access to nature, that it's very possible that CCRCs and other for-profit organizations would be interested in partnering merely because they're getting pressure from their residents. I think there's a little competition among CCRCs in Greensboro for who has the best place to live. And it might work to your advantage as you're trying to find community partners. But I wish I had a recording of this dinner, because I had students with me and they were flabbergasted at how loudly the residents were advocating for themselves. And that this was the area that they were interested in, because of course students think of this as being a new issue. They don't realize that older adults have been trying to be sustainable for a long time. But anyhow, are there other questions or comments? We have a small but wonderful group of people here.
Yeah, I would venture to say, coming out of some of the research that Dr. Benjamin Hickerson, who partnered with us on the Parks for All People project, one thing that he really impressed upon me was that even if you make the most beautiful, the most, accommodating and inclusive outdoor spaces, unless people know that there's someone there that they can meet up and do programming with, then they're not as likely to use the space. And so I think that's one thing that our active adult centers are starting to do and doing a great job of, creating programming around it, like with the pickleball complex and, the walking groups. So again, if it's like we have Country Park, people could easily walk around the lake and enjoy some ecotherapy, but unless someone else was going with them, you might not feel safe. Another thing that could be enhanced in spaces is like having, like a call button box or other features where you have a check-in at a front desk and say, hey, we're going to be outside for this amount of time. And if we don't come back, please send someone to check on us. So again, that you're not just an outdoor space where you could trip and fall and then no one would know that you're there to come help. So there could just be structural things that could be built in or programmatically built in so that it enhances the ability for people to want to use those spaces. But yeah, we're open to, not just enhancing the physical space, but enhancing the actual programs around it, the program around like the veterans meetup group or things like that. So we could look at doing some programming options and getting some funding and students involved and other community partners. So I'd be open to chatting with you about that if you want to. Thanks. Anybody else?
Anyone else? Well, it's this is really an interesting area, and I will say that it's one that many students are interested in. A lot of our undergraduate minors are CTR majors, and so the access to nature and recreational activities comes up a lot in my undergraduate courses. I'm sure it does in the graduate courses as well. I really appreciate you all being here today. Please do subscribe to the UNCG Growth YouTube channel and encourage other people to respond to this invitation and get on the email list. Sina's not here anymore, but she also has a presentation recorded, and so we'll add this one to it. And Jessica, I think your presentation didn't get recorded while I was on leave, but Jessica is also a former presenter, as is Chantel. So thank you all for being here, and have a good rest of the afternoon, and if you're on the faculty, a good rest of the semester. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.